that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Star Wars Expanded Universe, now either by Disney or Lucasfilm, whichever way you slice it, Legends. So, today remains kind of a sad day for me, a little bit, because, minus some source books, some short stories, other obscure things, this is the only EU novel that I hadn't read yet. Everything else, I mean, of course, everything in the prequel era and the Dawn of the Jedi era up until Truce of Bakor have been mostly a reread. But, mostly a review, like first time. But everything in Truce of Bakor onward is basically a reread. Except for this, because I skipped over it in my first go-through. Because I knew it wasn't essential to the overall main story, and so I just wanted to get to the stuff that mattered most to me. But today, we have 2012's Before the Dark Times, before Disney. Star Wars Scourge by Jeff Grubb. Now, this is the only book I know of that Jeff Grubb wrote in Star Wars, but he's written for source books in Star Wars and stuff. The plot of Scourge is essentially a novelization format of an RPG campaign that you could do. You know, like D&D and stuff, and, you know, role-playing games like that. There is a Star Wars one where this sort of story, the setup for it anyway, was kind of the basis of, like, an adventure you would go on. But this is a novelization form of such a story. Fun fact for those of you who know my friend Brennan, who is Quinlan Voss on YouTube, phenomenal EU YouTuber, way better than me, amazing guy. For him, when he got into the EU, this was the first EU book he actually read. This is how he actually found out that there was a larger universe out there, which is crazy. Kind of poetic in that way. My co-host on the Expanded Universe podcast, which you can go watch on expandeduniverse.com, which you absolutely should. But it's kind of poetic that my co-host, my partner, his first book in the Expanded Universe, and my last. But onto what the story's actually about. Can I just say this is a really underrated book? It's not by any means like this phenomenal book. Like, I think Shadow Games with Dash Rendar is actually like a superb novel. Like a novel that just gets slept on, but it really shouldn't. And it's most definitely going to either be my top 20 or my top 10 when I do like one of those types of videos on these books. But, you know, this is pretty good. I'd also probably have this in like a top 20, but probably for sure not in a top 10. But it's pretty good. But you know what? Just to piss off Noah, because I know he's a contrarian. I actually don't know. I don't know what his review is of this, but because it's all in German, how can I read it or understand it? But it's good. But you know what's better? You know what's really better than this book? Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi. I'll give you one Noah though. I think this whole book is better than Dark Nest overall. That's the only one I'll give you. But I just wanted to make fun of Noah real quick. But onto the actual story. So we follow a Jedi librarian. He would like to be called an archivist, but he's basically a librarian. He's basically, if not anything, the new Jocasta Nu of the EU. Jocasta Nu, for those of you who don't know, in case you're like, who the hell are you talking about? I'm talking about the old lady from the prequels who was in the library. But we follow a man named Mander Zuma, who is a Jedi Knight, and he was a master. He had an apprentice, and the story starts off with the apprentice high on some drugs and gets angry and then dies. And Mandar Zuma is left to finish the mission that the Jedi apprentice started, and to figure out the mystery of what's going on with this new spice called Tempest, which, if I'm not mistaken, is also a novel title in Legacy of the Force, just to piss off Noah again. But anyway, it's a really fun adventure. It feels like a D&D campaign through and through. You have Mandar Zuma, the main protagonist, gets a couple companions, a Bothan guy named Eddie, which I think is funny, and a Puntoran named Reen. And some of the fun things, you can tell that Jeff Grubb cares about the expanded universe because one of the places that is heavily visited in this book is you don't spend a lot of time there. It's not the central focus, but it's the fact that it's used at all, which is much appreciated, which is the corporate sector. Corporate sector, of course, being the section of space that Han Solo had his adventures in the Brian Daly books. The reason so you could have kind of like more flashy adventures without it, you don't want the Empire on his tail every 2 seconds, so it couldn't be the Empire, because the Empire isn't exactly looking for him in Episode 4, so corporate sector, you can get into more wacky, zany stuff and not worry about it because it's a different sector of space with different rules. But yeah, so we get the corporate sector in here, which the best way to describe the corporate sector is basically like what you think of when you think of a cyberpunk setting, where like corporations are the ones in power. Like that's how it is. It's capitalism to the extreme. But we also get to learn a lot about Hutts in here. Well, there's one specific Hutt family that we kind of follow, but we learn a lot through them, and it's really interesting, especially stuff with like the first Hutts, which is really fun. And also, we probably meet the only novel Hutt to be second in kindness to the Hutt we meet in the Tales of the Jedi comics, because that one is probably like legitimately the nicest Hutt in the world, but this one may not be as nice, but is honest and fair, which is really cool. There's a lot of Hutts in here, but like the main dad one is pretty honest and fair. Yeah, so they go on this adventure to figure out the spice and figure out what's going on with that, and that is basically the whole plot without getting into spoilers. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I'm sad that it's my last one, but if you just want a one-off adventure, with no ties to anything else, because you don't have any returning characters in here. The only thing you'll have in here, which is just, it's not really a huge spoiler, but I'll mention it just because I think it's cool, and I think it might make you a little bit more invested in it, considering there's not a single character in here that is someone you'd be familiar with. Like, it's all new people. Mandar Zuma, he is a Jedi Master now. He had his own apprentice and everything, but his master, Mandar Zuma's master, was Tyone Solasar. Tyone, who we met in the short story by Kevin J. Anderson, and would later be in the Jedi Academy trilogy. She was his master, which makes a lot of sense. But that was a really cool connection. So that's about the gist of that. One thing I've always talked about before I let you guys go and I get in the spoiler section is one thing I thought would be really cool. And as I was reading this, I started talking to Brennan about it. I was like, because he's already writing a fan fiction where Zuma's in the New Jedi Order, which is fine. That's awesome, actually, because this is set before that, which means he had to be a part of that. So, what was he doing? So, I'm glad that Brennan's writing something, even if it's not official, just to have a story with him. But and they're probably never going to go back to New Jedi Order, to be honest, even if we get more expanded universe. But what I would love to see, because I think his adventure is a bit more out there and a bit more wacky. It's all, there's nothing too insane, but I think it'd be really fun to put Mandar Zuma and Jaden Core from the Cross Current and Riptide duology to partner up after Crucible. Perhaps Luke sent Mandar Zuma and Jaden Core in one direction to go look for the Mortis dagger, and they come upon other weird and strange things. After all, Jaden did interact with that like mother thing, whatever the hell that was. So I don't know. I think stories set after Crucible following Mander Zuma and Jaden Core could be really fun. And I think those types of stories, other than the fact that I think the backdrop for a lot of stories post Crucible. Sorry, I'm getting a little off topic, but to having all these like miss-off adventures, like one-off adventures, would be the search for the Mortis dagger. So that's like the overarching plot. And then you have a bunch of other plots that are like intervening in that goal. You know, so I think the backdrop would be that they're looking for that, but they get into other adventures. And I think even people like Noah could enjoy stories like that. And maybe one day if the EU continues, we can get more. Because for a character that doesn't exist beyond this book, I really enjoyed what I read about him because Mander Zuma is a librarian for all archivist for all intents and purposes. He's not. I mean, he's fairly capable in the Force. He's a fairly capable fighter, but those aren't his strengths. Not really. His strengths are in his, being able to talk his way out of things, kind of like Lando, but with less charisma and just being very knowledgeable because he's a librarian. And I think that's a really cool character to follow. One that's not the typical archetype of being this awesome hero. And so, yeah, it was a really good time. I thought it was a pretty good novel, and I do say that Scourge is worth your time. So if you want a one-off adventure with characters that you'll never see again, unless the EU gets continued, set before New Jedi Order, but after the Hand of Thrawn duology, then this is the story for you. Also, Brendan gave me this book, of course, and a Legends banner. But also, I think this is one of the books he talked about that didn't have a Legends banner regardless, which is kind of cool. But, yeah. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much it. I hope I got you a little bit intrigued. I think it's pretty good. It's not like the greatest thing in the world, but it's a fun book. I do recommend it. And it doesn't require any investment in anything else because it's a pretty one-off story, other than the fact that it mentions Yavin 4, the Jedi Academy, and Tyone. But other than that, it's a pretty self-contained story. Anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching. I'm going to talk about spoilers now. If you don't want spoilers or you just don't care about spoilers, stick around. I warned you. You sticking around? Don't want spoilers? Last chance. Watching you. Okay. Okay. So, what did I write down? Toro Irana was Zuma's apprentice, and kind of the backdrop with Reen joining the group is that her brother was his apprentice, which causes a lot of drama there. I appreciate the honesty of this because the hut that I was referring to in my non-spoiler part is very ancient, very old. He's one of the longest living huts, and unlike most of his, family members, because it's kind of racist that everybody thinks that huts are, these greedy, manipulative bastards. But the issue is that most of them are. It's not even really a racist thing. It's more of a culturist thing because that's their culture. It's ingrained in like their society. Like that's just how they operate. It's not even about like them being giant slugs. It's just they are raised that way. From birth to death, they are raised to be that way. So, but but the hut that we get to meet is I just appreciate the honesty and the nicest hut that we see in this era of Star Wars. Mander is a super good diplomat, but as I said, he's a fairly average Jedi. One of the best parts of this book actually was when Reen asks Mander Zuma why he doesn't just use the Jedi mind trick. Like because they get interrogated by the corporate sector, and there's this lady who the Jedi needs to talk to, and she asks why not just just do that to her, and this book describes it in such a way which I don't think any book has really bothered to do, which is that, how it's described in this book is so much different than like any other book that talks about the Jedi mind trick. Because we always know like it doesn't work on the weak-minded. But also the reason that you don't use it habitually. right? Because on a weak mind, sure, it works. On a strong mind, you're not gonna be able to do it. But all the people that you can do it to, why don't you just do it all the time? Well, here's the thing too. Minor things, like opening a door, lapse of judgment. The mind can be fine, adjust to that, and be fine afterwards. But you ask somebody that's weak minded to do something they really, really strongly don't want to do. Like maybe you're a dark Jedi, or maybe you're not a dark Jedi, but okay, this is hypothetical. You tell a father that has a weak will, weak mind, kill your daughter, right? If you're a strong enough Jedi in the Force, or Sith, or whatever, they will comply eventually. They have a weak mind. But the mind afterwards will not be the same. The mind afterwards will be altered, will break, because you force someone to do something they really didn't want to do. Minus passing things like Obi-Wan does in episode 4, where he says, "These are not the droids you're looking for," and then they just pass along. Because you could just call that a lapse of judgment. It's not something that the stormtrooper was super invested in, which is the difference. So the way they describe the consequences of Jedi mind tricking people was really interesting, and it explains, why Luke and everyone doesn't just do that all the time to the weak minded, because it would affect them. It would affect the parties that they mess with, and maybe damage their brains forever. So they don't do it very often, which I thought was really interesting. Um, the spice that is being used in this book, it alters things to where it makes you super angry and stuff, but then also it affects the ability to use the Force. Like so when this book was using spice, and Mander Zuma just couldn't use the Force on them, or like as well, which I thought was interesting because of course the Vong are about to show up. But I thought the Tempest drug was an interesting idea for sure. And that's pretty much all the notes I have. The ending, of course, being that Micah the Hutt was the big bad of the whole time, who actually had the Force, and Commander Zuma's apprentice was trying to train him. So we were possibly going to get another Baldora or whatever from a Planet of Twilight, but he gets stopped in this book because he never really learns all the way of how to be that, because he wasn't properly trained all the way in that. So he mainly learned something that was super effective for him, which was the Jedi mind trick, which we talked about again. But that's about it. But yeah, I thought it was a really fun book, and I do think it is worth your time. But up next, wow, it's gonna be a small break from Star Wars, just one video, because my friend has released a novel, which I'm gonna be fair, but I'm not gonna be biased. I'm gonna review it how I'd review any other thing. But that's up next, and then we have Survivor's Quest, and then all of Young and Junior Jedi Knights. So I hope you'll join me for that. Until next time, guys, may the Force be with you. See you.